At the 1896 Olympics in Athens, feathered creatures were discharged as an indication of harmony and opportunity. The demonstration authoritatively turned into a piece of the initial functions starting in 1920 at the Antwerp Games. While it's hypothesized that the convention goes back hundreds of years, history specialists guarantee that homing fowls were first discharged during the antiquated Olympics so as to advise families and towns of a returning old neighborhood competitor's victory. Unfortunately, the emblematic custom would be anything besides bubbly during Seoul's initial function in 1988, when a couple of quills got unsettled. As three competitors rode a rising stage skyward to light the colossal light, various pigeons made the deplorable mistake in judgment of resting on the cauldron preceding its start. As the three lights lit the fire, a Korean grill resulted, transforming white plumes into debris for the world to see. It promptly became obvious that it was essential for the Olympic Council to modify future formal methodologies so as to maintain a strategic distance from another humiliating open display. Before the 1968 Summer Olympics in Mexico City, testing for tranquilizer use among Olympic competitors wasn't done. The insufficiency of such guidelines ought to have been obvious after the 1952 Oslo Winter Games, when a few speed skaters overdosed on amphetamines and required clinical mediation. Truly, the cyclist's post-mortem examination expressed that in spite of the fact that he had amphetamines in his framework, they were probably not going to have added to his demise. Regardless, Jensen's passing, therapeutically credited to heat stroke, was abused as purposeful publicity. Until this point, the fantasy encompassing the main competitor to overdose continues in the midst of huge amounts of proof demonstrating in any case. At the 1964 Summer Olympics, Kikichi Tsuburaya, a first lieutenant in the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, had the unmistakable respect of speaking to his country on his home turf in Tokyo. Such a benefit, be that as it may, would end up being simply a huge dissatisfaction for the lead long-distance runner, who was overwhelmed in the last 100 meters, completing third. Despite bringing home a bronze decoration, Tsuburaya was humiliated, accepting he had brought disgrace upon himself, his family, and his individual compatriots. As the torment turned out to be progressively incapacitating, Tsuburaya's sight on the gold decoration started to reduce. The unimportant idea of another mortifying thrashing was beyond what the main lieutenant could bear, and on January 9, 1968, he ended it all in his residence room by slicing his correct wrist with an extremely sharp edge. Tsuburaya's self-destruction note referred to his failure to run as the purpose behind his activities. During the initial function at the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne, junior mile champion Ron Clark was making the lap of respect around the principal arena's field, never understanding that the substance of his correct arm was being singed. As he surrounded, the wild praise of the arena made Clark negligent of the red-hot particles spilling from the light he conveyed. Simply in the wake of being given an emblem by an authority did Clark acknowledge he had not just left a path of fire on the track behind him, yet that the coals had consumed his shirt and seared pieces of his arm. Because of its extraordinary fixing, the mainstream dish Bosintang has created a remarkable uproar among outsiders visiting Pyeongchang for the 2018 Winter Olympics. All through the South Korean city, endless cafes keep on serving the customary stew made of canine meat regardless of government pressure and money-related motivations planned for checking deals with expectations of pacifying annoyed tourists. Such measures were taken before the 1988 Seoul Olympics, during which the offer of the meat got confined in parts of the city. What came about was an astonishing kickback powered by nationalism among certain Koreans, who started eating more pooches exclusively to demonstrate hatred for forcing outside perspectives. The 1904 Summer Olympics in Street. We have been exemplified as one of the more odd shows in athletic history. Having been eclipsed by the World's Fair, the Games were laced with the Reasonable's own program of games, which included mudslinging and ethnic moving exclusively for the beguilement of Caucasian observers.
In the interim, the result of the Olympics' first occasion, the long-distance race, was a bunch of bonehead scenes past epic extent. Just a bunch of sprinters were perceived long-distance runners, and most of the race was made out of peculiarities, including 10 Greek nationals who had never contended in a long-distance race and 2 Shoeless Tsuana tribesmen from South Africa, who were just around as a major aspect of the fair. During the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria, British luger Kazimierz Kasprzepecki was murdered in a disaster area during training, as was Australian skier Ross Milne, who slammed into a tree in the wake of taking off the course of the slope. From colliding with steel shafts at the 2010 Winter Games in Vancouver to sunstroke passings at the 1912 Summer Olympics in Stockholm, maybe the most crazy demise of all happened at the 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France. Swiss speed skier Nicolas Boquetet jumped over a little slope during warm-ups and collided with an approaching tractor-like vehicle used to prepare the path. To compound an already painful situation, Boquetet's passing came extremely close to rivalry. Rising strains between South Korea and their neighbors toward the north is the same old thing, particularly during the Olympic season. From the second Seoul initially won its offer to have the 1988 Summer Games, North Korea was resolved to upset the regarded merriments at all expense. The system's assurance took a malevolent turn on November 29, 1987, when Korean Air Flight 858 from Baghdad to Seoul vanished over the Andaman Sea with 115 travelers on board. South Korean President Chun Doo-hwan quickly accused the North, officially charging the nation for the disaster 2 months after the fact. Amazingly, the socialist government denied the charges and caught up with extensive ineffectual endeavors to convince partners, China and the Soviet Union, explicitly, to blacklist the Games. One of the world's most exceedingly terrible arena catastrophes happened in Lima, Peru, on May 24, 1964, when an unruly horde of submitted football fans turned out to be somewhat bothered at an official's incorrect call. As nerve gas descended upon observers, the individuals who endeavored to escape into the boulevards ended up blockaded behind shut doors, and they suffocated in the firmly stuffed passages. While the official loss of life stays at 328, it isn't intelligent of the quantity of casualties slaughtered outside the arena by police gunfire. Truth be told, that number may never be known, given that incalculable carcasses with projectile injuries bafflingly evaporated from the morgues, and the names of the dead were rarely recorded. "I've recently shot yourself in the foot," Judge Rosemarie Aquilina said in a Michigan court in January 2018 in the wake of condemning Drive. Larry Nassar to 40 to 175 years in prison. While the disrespected previous USA gymnastics specialist brought down his head in disgrace, the nation addressed how the rape of in excess of 150 young ladies and young ladies proceeded, or maybe was neglected, for 2 decades. Of the 156 ladies who stood up relating the maltreatment they suffered under the pretense of clinical treatment, it turned out to be nauseatingly clear that incalculable exploited voices were disregarded throughout the years by associations in power, essentially USA Gymnastics, Michigan State University, and the US Olympic Committee.